If you're looking for an easy crochet slouchy hat to make, then you've come to the right place. I'm Littlejohn Yarns and I come out with new videos every single week, so make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. This crochet pattern is super easy to make. If you can crochet a granny square, then you can definitely make this hat. Let's hop into the pattern breakdown. We'll begin with a simple granny square of increasing rows. Then we'll stop increasing rows and build up the sides, followed by working on the brim of your hat. The materials used for this video are worsted weight yarn. I'm using Dark Horse Fantasy yarn, but you can use any 4-ply or Aran weight yarn, and a 5mm crochet hook. Make sure you go to my website to follow along to the written pattern. As usual, I provide you with timestamps for easy pattern navigation. The first 4 rows will be in black, but for viewing purposes, I'm using a different color. We're going to begin by making a slip knot, and we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Slip stitch to join into the very first stitch to form a ring. Now that we have our ring, we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Your chain 3 will count as a double crochet throughout this pattern. We're going to place 2 more double crochets into the ring. 1 and 2. These 3 double crochets will be considered your cluster. So let's chain 1 and do another cluster stitch. That's 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. That's going to be your pattern repeat all the way around. You're going to do that 2 more times. Cluster, chain 1, cluster. Once you complete that, I'll meet you back at the other side, so pause your video here. We've made it back around, and you should have a total of 4 clusters and 4 chain 1 spaces. Now we're going to slip stitch to join into the top of your chain 3 stitch. 1, 2, 3, count up, and slip stitch. Now we're going to slip stitch over until you make it to this chain 1 space. So we're going to slip stitch over 3 spaces. 1, 2, slip stitch into that chain 1 space, 3, and we have our new starting position. So next we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Remember, your chain 3 counts as a double crochet. We're going to place 2 more double crochets into this chain 1 space. 1 and 2. That counts as your first cluster. Chain 1. We're going to place another cluster back into the same space. So that's 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1. That is going to be our pattern repeat all the way around. We're going to chain 1, place cluster, chain 1 cluster into the same space, chain 1, and put a cluster, chain 1 cluster into the very next space, all the way around, and I'll meet you back at the other side. We've made it back around, and I'll put my last chain 1 stitch in. You should have a total of 8 clusters all the way around. So next we're going to slip stitch to join into the top of your chain 3 stitch. 1, 2, 3. Slip stitch to join. And we're going to slip stitch over into the chain 1 space. So slip stitch over into the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, and into your chain 1 space, 3. We're in our new starting position. We're working this hat just like you would any other granny square pattern. As you can see, it's starting to be a square. Now we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. We're going to place 2 double crochet back into the very same stitch. 1 and 2. Chain 1. Place another cluster back into the very same stitch. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to chain 1 and place 1 cluster into the side stitch. We're always going to place 1 cluster into the side of your work. So that's just 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1. And in the corner, you're always going to place 2 clusters. So now we're back to the next corner. So we're going to place 2 clusters in that section. So let's do your first cluster. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1, cluster back into the very same stitch. 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1. That is going to be our pattern repeat all the way around. We're going to place 2 clusters, cluster, chain 1 cluster into your corner stitches, and on your side stitch, you're going to just place 1 cluster. So 2 clusters, cluster, 2 clusters, cluster, 2 clusters, cluster, all the way around. So pause your video here, and I'll meet you back at the other side. We've made it back around, and you should have a total of 12 clusters, and you can see your granny square is getting a little bit bigger, but don't worry, the further we get along, this whole square shape will be completely worked out. So already chained 1, so let's slip stitch into the 3rd stitch up. 1, 2, 3. Whoops, almost lost my yarn. And slip stitch over 3 spaces. 1, 2, slip stitch over into the chain 1 space, and 3. We're in our starting point. Chain 3 to start. 1, 2, 3. 2 double crochets back into this corner. Because remember, in the corner we do 2 clusters, and this will be our very first cluster. First cluster complete. Chain 1. Cluster back into the very same stitch to complete this corner. So that's our first double crochet, second, and third. Chain 1. And since we're working on our sides, we're just going to put 1 singular cluster in each one of our side stitches. So already chained 1, cluster into this side stitch, 1, whoops, lost my stitch, 2, and 3. Chain 1, cluster into the next stitch, 1, 2, and 3. Chain 1, and since we're back at the corner, you're going to place 2 clusters into the corner stitch. I'll work that with you. I'm going to move a little bit faster because I'm sure you know how to work a cluster by now. That's 2 and 3. Chain 1. And if you ever find that the video is going too fast, you can look to the upper right corner of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you'll see 3 little dots. You can click that and you can slow down the video from there. Or if you're on a desktop or a laptop, you'll see a gear button down below. Click on that and you can slow down the video from there. And I'll put in my last double crochet for our corner stitch. And that is going to be our pattern repeat all the way around. So remember, corners have 2 clusters. So cluster, chain 1 cluster. And on your side, you'll just have a singular cluster. So cluster, chain 1, go to your next stitch, cluster. So pause your video here, complete this row, and I'll meet you back at the other side. As you can see, I switched back over to my black yarn and we completed our last increase row. And if you're following along to my color pattern, what you're going to do now is slip stitch to join into the top of your chain 3 stitch and fasten off your work. If you're sticking with the same exact color pattern, you're just going to slip stitch over into the chain 1 space and continue your pattern from there. But like I said, I am switching colors. Right now, I'm moving on to the green. And like I said, if you're following my color pattern, we're doing 4 black, 5 green, 5 yellow, 5 red. So let's attach this yarn to your corner piece. All right, chain 3 as usual. 1, 2, 3. Place 2 double crochet back into the chain 1 space. 1 and 2. We're no longer increasing our stitches. We're going to put a cluster stitch in each chain 1 space all the way around. Usually we would increase at the corner, but we're not going to be doing that. We're just placing 1 cluster in each chain 1 space around. So this was the first cluster. Chain 1, place a cluster in the next. That's 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, you can pause your video here. Continue placing 1 cluster in each chain 1 space all the way around until you make it back to the other side. Pause and I'll meet you there. We've made it back around and we're just going to slip stitch into the top of your chain 3 stitch. 1, 2, 3. And as you notice, if you look around your edges, the square edges that you once had, since we stopped decreasing, your square edges is becoming more round. And this previous row is just going to be a pattern repeat where you're going to slip stitch over into the chain 1 space and do a cluster, chain 1 cluster into each chain 1 space around. Remember, we are not increasing any more rows. 1 cluster is going to go into each of your chain 1 spaces. We're going to do this for an additional 14 more rows. So remember, and if you're following my color pattern, I'm switching color every 5 rows. First 4 rows are black. The next 5 rows is green, followed by the next 5 rows being yellow and the next 5 rows being red. So pause your video here and I'll meet you at the completion of your additional 14 rows. We've made it back around and here's what your hat looks like so far. At this point, if you would like to, you can try your hat on. If the hat feels a little bit big, just drop down 1 hook size. All right, so let's slip stitch to join into that first, the top of your chain 3 stitch. And this time we're going to chain 1 and we're going to single crochet in that very same space. We're going to single crochet in each stitch, each double crochet, and each chain 1 space all the way across. So single crochet across those double crochets and single crochet into your chain 1 space. That is going to be our pattern repeat all the way across. We're going to single crochet in every double crochet and chain 1 space all the way across. So pause your video here and I'll meet you back at the other side. We've made it back around and I'm going to put a single crochet into the last stitch, but I'm going to stop halfway through so I can change colors. I'm going to switch over to my black color, pull through the 2 loops on a hook, and now I'm just going to slip stitch to join into that very first single crochet. All right, and the next 5 rows are going to be a pattern repeat. You're just going to do a row of single crochets for the next 5 rows. And the color sequence, if you're following along, will be black, followed by green, yellow, red, and back to black again. So pause your video here and continue with 5 rows of single crochets. Okay, we've made it back around and completed our additional rows, and all I did was slip stitch to join into the very next single crochet and fasten off your work. What we're going to do, we're just going to flip our hat over and make sure the tail end of your work where you slip stitch to join is in the middle of your hat. See your hat? And here's the middle. We're going to start our brim on the far corner. And we're going to be working with 2 strands of yarn to make a nice sturdy brim. So let's attach our yarn. And we're going to single crochet into the very same stitch in the next 6 stitches. So the first stitch is 1. We're doing 6 stitches total. 2 single crochet, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're going to half double crochet into the next 24 stitches. I'll do the first stitch with you. Half double crochet. All right, pause your video here. Continue placing half double crochets in the next 24 stitches. Pause your video here. I'll meet you at the completion of your 24, and that includes that first one we did together. We've completed those stitches. Now single crochet into the next 6 stitches. Single crochet. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're just going to chain 1 stitch and turn our work. We're going to skip that very first stitch right here and single crochet into the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Next, we're going to double crochet into the next 24 stitches. So double crochet. This one is 1. All right, pause your video here. Continue placing a total of 24 double crochets into the next stitches. I'll meet you at the end. Okay, we completed those additional 24 stitches, and now we're just going to single crochet into the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to skip the next stitch and single crochet into the last. Chain 1. Turn your work. We are going to skip this very first stitch and single crochet into the very next stitch. We're going to continue placing 1 single crochet all the way across until you make it to the last 2 stitches. So leave the last 2 stitches unworked and I'll meet you there. We made it to our last 2 stitches, 1 and 2. We're going to skip the next stitch. I know it's hard to see, but skip that next stitch and single crochet into the very last stitch. And our last row is just going to be a repeat of the last, but I'll work it with you. Chain 1, turn your work, skip the very first stitch, and single crochet in every stitch all the way across, and leave the last 2 stitches unworked, and we'll crochet those together. Okay, we've made it to the last 2 stitches, 1 and 2. I know it's hard to see, but we're going to skip that next stitch and single crochet into the last stitch. And we're just going to fasten off our work. And the brim of your hat is complete. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out my other crochet slouchy hats. Okay guys, I'll see you all on the very next tutorial.